Hey guys, tonight we begin with something very relatable. Sleep, or more accurately, how medieval people slept, which turns out to be far weirder than most of us could imagine. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Before electricity, TikTok, and sleep hygiene influences, medieval people approached nighttime with a schedule that would baffle the modern melatonin enthusiast. It was called segmented sleep, a natural two-part sleep cycle, split neatly in half like a stale medieval biscuit. The routine was simple. After sundown, most people turned in early, drifting off into what was known as first sleep. Then, after about 4 hours, they'd wake up deliberately and spend the next hour or two doing what can only be described as medieval midnight multitasking. This wasn't considered insomnia, it was just how sleep worked. The watch period between the two sleeps was seen as practical, useful, and occasionally alarmingly social. People used this time to pray, read religious texts, tend fires, or check their livestock, because nothing ruins your REM cycle like wondering if your goat is still in the yard. And yes, this was also considered the ideal time for intimacy. Medieval physicians and marriage manuals noted that the body was well rested and calm of mind during this period, which sounds like a polite way of saying too tired to argue. So, if you ever thought you were romantic for waking up early to make your partner coffee, just know your ancestors were setting the bar very differently. The second sleep would follow this interlude, lasting until sunrise. Everyone from monks to farmers participated in this nightly rhythm. Even literary figures like Chaucer casually mentioned it, which means that yes, even in medieval literature, people were writing about not sleeping properly. Oddly enough, modern science has suggested that segmented sleep might actually be more natural for humans. The two-sleep cycle aligns with how our circadian rhythms work in the absence of artificial light. So, the next time you find yourself wide awake at 2 a.m., don't panic, just whisper, "Ah yes, the watch has begun," and go tend a symbolic fireplace. It wasn't until the industrial era, with factories, gas lamps, and the growing fear of unproductivity, that humans began to enforce the idea of 8 uninterrupted hours, as though sleep were a timed sport. In the medieval world, waking up in the middle of the night wasn't failure, it was the schedule, and everyone was on it whether they liked it or not. Let's talk about beds, or rather the medieval approximation of them. In today's world, we obsess over thread counts, memory foam, cooling gels, and whether a mattress is cloud-like. In medieval Europe, a bed was often just a pile of stuff that used to be alive, now flattened under the weight of poor sleep and unspoken regrets. The typical peasant bed consisted of a straw mattress known as a pallet. This was literally straw or hay stuffed into a sack of rough fabric, if they had the luxury of a sack. If not, it was just straw on the floor, possibly damp, possibly already claimed by a cat. These pallets were not comfortable, but they were better than nothing, which was the alternative. Straw was cheap, plentiful, and good at insulating against the cold. It was also great at harboring insects, lice, and the occasional field mouse, which made sleeping an exercise in cautious stillness. If it itched, you ignored it. If it bit, you just shifted slightly and hoped for the best. If a family had a bit more money, or at least a functional back, they might elevate the straw mattress onto a wooden frame. This didn't change the sleep experience dramatically, but it did reduce the chances of waking up with beetles in your ears slightly. Linens were a rare treat. Most people slept in the clothes they wore all day. Pajamas weren't really a thing, and neither was personal space. Whole families, children, parents, maybe a grandparent, all slept together in the same space, sometimes on the same straw pile. If you got too warm, you could always roll into your cousin's elbow. Nobles, of course, had proper beds, large wooden frames, feather mattresses, embroidered sheets, and canopies to keep out the drafts, and hopefully the lice. These beds were so valuable they were passed down in wills. You didn't inherit land, you inherited Aunt Matilda's suspiciously lumpy feather bed. Still, for most medieval folks, a bed wasn't a place of comfort, it was a place to not freeze, to avoid the chickens, and maybe, just maybe, to dream of being rich enough to one day sleep on something that didn't squawk or rustle. When we hear nightcap today, we think of a cozy little drink,
Maybe something with whiskey, a warm fire, and a questionable decision. But in the medieval world, a nightcap wasn't a beverage, it was a hat. A real, tangible, often ridiculous-looking piece of fabric designed to keep your head from freezing off while you slept. You see, insulation wasn't exactly the strong point of medieval architecture. Stone walls, drafty thatched roofs, and windows made of thin animal horn or oiled parchment didn't do much against the cold. And central heating, that was called a dog. So, to keep their heads warm at night, especially since body heat escapes fastest through the scalp, medieval people adopted the humble nightcap. These hats came in all shapes and sizes, but the most iconic version was long and pointed, like something you'd expect on a wizard who moonlights as a chimney sheep. They were usually made from wool, linen, or whatever scrap of warmth could be spared without angering the family goat. For men, it was a practical accessory. For women, it sometimes doubled as a coif or head wrap, which also served the dual purpose of maintaining modesty and covering hair that hadn't seen soap since last Lent. But beyond warmth, nightcaps had social weight too. In some regions, married women were expected to cover their heads at all times, yes, even while asleep. And the cap itself could be embroidered or dyed to reflect a family's wealth or status, because nothing says success like going to bed with a mini flag on your skull. In more urban settings, the nightcap even became a symbol of being off-duty. If you opened your door wearing one, it was a polite medieval way of saying, "I'm not dressed for conversation, and yes, this hat means go away." Of course, nightcaps were paired with night shirts, which were essentially long, loose tunics. Picture Ebenezer Scrooge minus the haunted moral lesson. Sleepwear wasn't sexy, but it was practical, itchy, and occasionally flammable. Today, the idea of sleeping next to a stranger is generally limited to red-eye flights, overly ambitious camping trips, or the occasional bizarre Airbnb mix-up. But in the medieval world, this was completely normal, and not at all optional. Let's say you're a traveling merchant, a pilgrim, or just someone whose mule gave up halfway to Norwich. You find an inn, a rare luxury in itself, and ask for a place to sleep. What you get is not a room or a bed or even a particularly clean floor. What you get is a spot in a bed that's already occupied. Medieval inns operated more like human bunkhouses than modern hotels. Privacy was not expected. If the bed had space, you were sharing it, usually with complete strangers who might snore, talk in their sleep, or have a suspicious number of boils. This was not considered rude, it was just efficient use of resources. Beds could host 2, 3, even 4 travelers, depending on size and social tolerance. In larger cities, you might end up in a dormitory-like hall with rows of beds and absolutely zero personal space. Snoring contests were unjudged. Elbow territory was fiercely contested. Sometimes men and women were separated, but not always. Some inns tried to assign beds by profession, blacksmiths with blacksmiths, clergy with clergy, thieves with other thieves, allegedly. But often it was first come, first sprawled. And while this might sound like a nightmare to modern germaphobes, back then it was an upgrade from sleeping outdoors with the wolves, the rain, and the occasional peasant uprising. Worried about theft? Many travelers slept with their purse tied to their belt or hidden under their clothes. Others slept on top of their bundles, turning luggage into both pillow and alarm system. If someone moved your bag, it usually meant you were about to wake up poorer. The rich, of course, did not suffer this fate. Nobles traveled with entourages and demanded their own rooms if an innkeeper valued their roof. In the medieval world, going to bed wasn't just about pulling up a blanket and drifting off. It was a spiritual operation, a nightly gamble where the stakes were your eternal soul. People didn't just sleep, they prepared to potentially die, hence the popularity of bedtime prayers. Forget lavender spray or calming podcasts. Medieval sleepers wound down with confessions, psalms, and soul-cleansing spiritual clauses, just in case they died between good night and dawn. The idea was simple. You could die at any moment from illness, fire, demons, or most dangerously being over 30 in the year 1247. So you'd better say your prayers, not because it was comforting, but because hell was terrifying and you didn't want to show up uninvited, unwashed, and spiritually disheveled. One common version, if I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. Sweet, right? Except it's basically a legal document written by a 7-year-old acknowledging death as a likely bedtime outcome. Many adults had a whole catalog of prayers for different threats. One when you were feeling guilty, one when you thought the devil might be hiding in the rafters, one for plague prevention, which unfortunately aged poorly. Some even prayed to specific saints known for watching over sleepers, kind of like holy bouncers guarding your soul at the club door. The really devout monks, nuns, and overly anxious nobles ended their day with Compline, the final prayer service before bed. After Compline, they took a vow of silence, which wasn't hard because everyone was already exhausted, underfed, and mildly afraid of the dark. Children were also encouraged to pray, in part because it was good for their souls, and in part because it gave them something to do other than ask why the dog was in their bed again. Parents reminded them that angels were watching, which sounds adorable until you realize it was less guardian angel and more celestial surveillance system. In short, prayer before sleep was less about peace and more about last-minute damage control. Think of it like medieval antivirus software. You hoped it worked, even if you didn't fully understand how. In the modern world,